are so glad that you are here, and I hope you were as inspired as I was by our opening plenary session. Part of what you heard Dean Elwood speak about is innovation combined with evaluation, and hope combined with pragmatism, and theory combined with practice. And so this session is, we hope, an instantiation of the combination of those things. It's a chance to let you be students for a little while, and then to step back and talk about what it was like to be students in Dan Levy's classroom, and to think more broadly about teaching and learning here at the Kennedy School. So we're calling it Pulling Back the Curtain on Teaching, in as much as it's going to allow us to have a taste of it and then to talk about it. So I want to say a little word about SLATE, which is the enterprise that I'm lucky enough to be a part of, and a couple of my SLATE colleagues are here, Maria and Carolyn. SLATE was started a handful of years ago to support teaching excellence and innovation here at the Kennedy School. You can see the nifty acronym. And essentially we've got several different dimensions of our work together that includes the creation of curriculum as well as the implementation of it through pedagogical practice, then the stepping back and assessing how well did that practice work, and increasingly the use of instructional technology to help us do that. So my job includes the opportunity to interact with faculty here at the Kennedy School, sitting in on their classrooms, listening to them, and helping them plan their courses and design and assess around student learning outcomes. And it's a wonderful opportunity to be in that space of both innovation and evaluation. My colleague Dan Levy is the faculty chair of SLATE, and is one of the Kennedy School's most beloved teachers. And in 20 plus years of my work in faculty development, Dan is one of the most curious and innovative and thoughtful and dedicated instructors I've ever encountered. So more on Dan in a moment as he introduces himself. But our game plan for this session is, as I mentioned, to give you the chance to learn a little bit from Dan about today's topic, impact evaluation. You'll see on the tables that you've got pens and index cards. As we go through, be thinking about what is Dan doing as an instructor that you find effective for you as a learner, and are there questions that you might want to ask Dan. About half an hour into the session, we'll stop and basically have a debrief. So that's the time when we'll hear your questions and your reflections, and we can broaden out to more broadly talking about teaching and learning kinds of issues. So questions about this? I think you've all seen our request to do your name tense, so we can all use each other's names. So great. Dan.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We're going to have a class on impact evaluations, and before we do that, I thought I could tell you three things. One about myself, one about my approach to teaching, and one about what this session is going to be about. And then we can get started pretending that you are my students. A word about myself. I love teaching. This is what I like to do. This is what brought me here at the Kennedy School. And the challenge of helping someone else learn is one that motivates me to come here every day. And one of the things that has become pretty clear to me as I've been here 10 years at the Kennedy School is how fortunate I am to teach the students that come here at the school. I honestly cannot imagine better students to teach than the ones that come here. I know most of you have come here at the school, and I'm not sure you hear this often enough, but I want to tell you what a privilege it is for some of us to have you here in our classrooms. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to tell you is about my teaching approach. There's a famous comic strip that I think illustrates a key insight into teaching that I want to show you. I'll let you read it. It's not that clear, but so this insight that teaching is not the same as learning. For most of you, this may seem like pretty obvious. Is this guy really serious that he ever thought that this was the case? But my teaching approach over the last 15 years, since I started teaching, has actually evolved quite a bit by keeping in mind this distinction. As a teacher, you tend to focus on what is it that I'm going to do in the front of the classroom. Does the PowerPoint slide look well? Are the words flying in the order that I want? Is my voice okay? Is my verbal language okay? All those things, I'm not saying they're not important, but the more you focus on those things, the more you're missing the whole point of teaching, which is simply learning. And so the last few years I've become obsessed, not with teaching, but with learning, with the learning of my students. And that underpins everything that I do. And most importantly, that underpins everything that SLATE, which is our initiative to advance teaching and learning at the school, does. So when Allison meets someone, a faculty member who's trying to improve their teaching, what she's keeping in mind, the first question she asks is, what do you want your students to be able to learn at the end of this experience? When we design curricular material, that's exactly what we're asking. It's not how interesting this case is or how cool this simulation is. It's how is this going to promote the learning of our students. When Maria meets someone and is thinking about instructional technology here at the Kennedy School, it's not about the hardware or the software. It's about how we're going to promote learning at the school. This is at the center of what we do. And if you live here with one message, this is it. This is what we care about. So what are we going to do in this session? What I'm hoping is for you to experience what it means to be a student at the Kennedy School. Most of you have been. And what I'm hoping you will discover is some ways in which I try to promote learning. Some of them might work, others might not. You have index cards to write your notes, and you decide which ones work and which ones don't. The real value of this session is not in the next 20 minutes of teaching. The real value is the reflection we'll all do about the teaching that happened. But the next 20 minutes are important to make those reflections grounded, so that you're not talking just about, oh yeah, it's great teaching and learning and all of this. So that's what we're going to do. I have to say, for me, this is quite a challenge, because over the next 20 minutes, I have to pretend you're my students. You're not. I also have to pretend you're interested in impact evaluations, and I don't know much about you, and my sense is that's probably not why you sign up for this session. For all I know, maybe this was your third choice and you couldn't get any other. I'm not even sure that you wanted to be here. And so what I'm going to ask you is to pretend you're my student for the next 20 minutes. And I know it's hard to pretend, but pretend you're interested in impact evaluations in the next 20 minutes. And then we'll see what happens. Make sense? All right, so impact evaluations are about finding out whether programs work. What does that mean? There are billions of dollars spent every year on social programs that are trying to make the lives of people better. So you could have a microfinance program trying to improve the earnings of people. You could have a program trying to reduce gun violence. Programs aimed at improving, in the corporate setting, at improving training and performance of employees. Herbert is from a law school at Presume. He has programs to try to serve people who don't have access to good legal education. So all of these programs are trying to do good, but the reality is that not all of them do. And what impact evaluations are about is simply to measure whether the programs are making a difference in people's lives. This is not an academic exercise. It's not like, okay, we're going to do a bunch of statistical analysis and find out something that's irrelevant. This is actually about finding what programs work for real people who might be in need of services. So what I want you to do now is to think about a program or a person that is served by a program that you care about. So we can ground this discussion and at least you have a feel for why you might want to know the answer to an impact evaluation. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples from my own work, but I want you to look into your own life before we proceed. So this is a child who's going to a tutoring program in India. And there are some researchers that tried to find out whether this tutoring program was making a difference in terms of this child's learning. These are children in Burkina Faso in West Africa. And I was involved in an evaluation that built girl-friendly schools for them. What you see there is a regular school in Burkina Faso. These are the desks, as you can see, the stones. These are the notebooks, which are just little chalkboards where kids write. They have no way of keeping a record of what they're learning because that's all they have. It's these chalkboards where they write and then they have to erase if they want to write something else. And what we set out to do is to evaluate whether these girl-friendly schools that have classrooms that look much better than this, that can withstand rain, make a difference in terms of how many children enroll in schools and in terms of their learning. So those to me are two examples that I care a lot about. But it's not about what I care a lot about, it's let's find out a little bit what might be a program or a person served by a program that you care about, and I'm going to ask you to write it down. Mark.
So there's a project that I'm helping with called the Global Teacher Prize.
Okay.
Very appropriate for this.
Yeah.
And so there's a non-profit foundation that is doing the Nobel Prize for Teaching.
Great.
So one teacher will get $1 million.
$1 million?
$1 million for the best Global Teacher. So
that's not what the school pays us here.
So what's interesting if you look at an impact evaluation is that the goal is not really to give one teacher $1 million. It's to fundamentally change people's perception of teaching as a profession, and then also ultimately to include better reference frame to what a good teaching looks like, to improve the quality of teaching for everybody.
Great.
So an impact evaluation is how do we achieve the wider goal, not just find the one.
Great, great, great. So the price is as really an incentive to improve the behavior of everyone, not just, okay, great. In fact, Carolyn and Allison and I have devoted a lot of time in the past month to thinking about what incentives we might offer our teachers. And when we were thinking about money price, it was in the thousands of dollars, not $1 million. But I get the point of your program. So let me...
And it's not my $1 million, by the way.
No, I got it. So I'm going to let me just pause for a second and tell you the exact question that an impact evaluation tries to answer, and then I want to translate your question, your program into a question. So what impact evaluations seek to answer is a question of this form. What is the causal effect of a program on a certain outcome of interest? And so, Mark, let's go with your program. So let's just think of any impact evaluation question has the same form. Is effect of something on some outcome. So in your case, is the Global Teacher Program is called?
The Global Teacher Prize, GTP for short.
You want to give us the website so we all go and check it afterwards?
Yes, it is globalteachingprize.org.
Okay.
And by the way, the constraint, and I apologize for everybody here, is you have to be teaching children between the ages of 5 and 18 in a school setting.
Okay.
And that's it.
Got it. Okay. So you're saying we're not eligible for it?
I'm sorry, but maybe you find a philanthropist to do another prize for university professors.
You're an entrepreneur, right?
Yes.
Okay. Tech companies?
I started the tech companies.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
some other stuff.
Okay, great. So what is the outcome? I know there are many outcomes you're trying to achieve, but if you had to define one that's important to you.
So there's a number of outcomes. So one is awareness in general. This is the first year of a multi-year prize. So the effect is that teachers and teaching-related organizations and institutions are aware that this activity exists,
Okay.
and will take some effort to improve the quality of teaching in their places.
So ultimately, let's just say you're interested in the quality of teaching.
Correct.
And as you defined before, it's not the quality of teaching of the person who wins the prize, but the quality of teaching of most of the people who aspire to win the prize. Karen and Allison, we should take Mark for coffee because he might give us some good ideas on how we're going to organize our more modest efforts here at the Kennedy School. Okay, anyone else? Can you think of a program or a personal survey program that you want to have here as at least in the background of your mind as we learn about this? Yes.
I work with inner city kids, giving them leadership development skills.
Okay, so is it, does your program have a name or?
Third Street Foundation. Third Street Foundation.
Third Street Foundation. So what is the effect of Third Street Foundation? And let's say, to keep it simple, that we have some way of measuring their leadership skills, maybe some inventory, or some way to measure. Is that?
That's a skill that we're trying to impart, but I don't think that's our outcome.
Okay, very good. So tell me what your outcome measure is.
Post-secondary advancements.
Post-secondary advancements?
For jobs.
Okay, so just to define it more formally, how about graduation rate from high school? Is that? Okay, great. Let's do one more. Christian.
I have worked in Germany at Leuphana University, which is probably the most intense reform project in the higher ed area in
Okay.
Germany over the last decade. We have basically changed the whole study model, like the whole university model in 2007.
Okay.
So, and it's a big question, like what is the outcome actually?
Okay. So it's a university reform.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what would you hope to have achieved if this is successful? So.
Well, that's an interesting question. You could think about graduation rate, you could think about employment rates, you could
Okay.
just think about having become like better persons for the students. You could also think of having become more wise or grown in wisdom.
Yeah, yeah. So you, like in most impact evaluations or for most programs, there are several outcomes you care about. We're simplifying here just to be able to make this a little bit more tractable. But these are three examples, all related to education, by the way. It's pretty clear why you showed up at this session. These are three examples of programs that we might want to evaluate. And I want to say one thing at the outset, and please take no offense. It is entirely possible that these three programs achieve this success, but it is almost equally likely that they won't. If you think about the number of impact evaluations that have been done, there are lots of programs with very good intentions like this one that don't translate into better outcomes. And so when Mark is thinking, I know this is not your $1 million, but when Mark is thinking about how to spend that $1 million 5 years from now, it'd be helpful for him to know that this program improved the quality of teaching. Because if the answer is not, he might want to spend the money somewhere else. Okay? So that's the whole goal of the impact evaluations. I have a couple of examples here that are more in my world, but we're going to use, so you could do what is the effect of Obamacare on health outcome, what is the effect of a microfinance program on this learning. So what I want to do now is, we've defined very loosely, so an impact evaluation is about what is the effect of a program on an outcome of interest. And what I want to do now is to really get into, okay, what exactly does impact mean, and how do we assess it? And I do want to say that for professional evaluators, this question of how do we assess impact is one that is a fairly technical question, which requires the use of statistical methods. This talk, this class will be in plain English, so you should not worry about seeing mathematical symbols on the slides if that is not what you prefer. But I do want to have a sense of where you are. And so I want to ask you one question so I know where you are. If you could take your clicker devices and point to which of these best characterizes your thoughts about statistics. And we have, so as you can see, there's a number of responses there. I think we have about 13 people in the room. And here's what you're saying. All right, more than half of you have good memories of statistics. I teach statistics, so I usually would like to think that all my students are here, but I'm not sure about that. So let's examine what exactly is impact. And I want us to ground this on the following example. Let's suppose we take the Third Street Foundation program and we ask ourselves that Jamie suggested, and we see that the graduation rate from high school of children before they go and join the Third Street Foundation program, before the Third Street Foundation program is implemented, let's suppose that this is what was happening to the graduation rate. So where is your program, Jamie?
Toronto.
Toronto. I'm not sure I can pronounce it as you just did, but Toronto. So in Toronto, let's say that this was a graduation rate, not of all children in Toronto, but say of children who potentially have the demographic or socioeconomic characteristics. And let's say that then the Third Street program starts at some point in time, and this is what happens to the graduation rates afterwards. So my question to you is, what is the impact of this program? There you see the answers, and so please use your clickers to respond.
This is question number 2, correct?
So, yeah.
Just push.
Just push A, B, C, D, or E.
What is the question that we're answering again?
So what is the impact of this program that we have here, that I just described?
Oh, I see.
So suppose that Jamie's Third Street program, exactly what I had described, happened, which is this was the graduation rate before he implemented the program, and then this is the graduation rate after.
And the assumption is this is the only variable that changes?
You make whatever assumptions you want. Okay, we have 13, so I'm going to play a little trick on you, and I'm not going to show you what you're telling me. Great, so here's what I'm going to ask you. You're sitting down in tables. I'm going to ask you to discuss your answer to the question we just saw, and try to convince each other of your answers. And then 3 minutes from now, we'll do another vote and see what happens. Go ahead.
I said constant, but
I said no to that.
I said aye.
You just made there.
So you need to convince us.
An increase in graduation. Yeah. That's why No, but I don't care. Because obviously you want politicians to put in more money, so you spin it as much as possible. It's not about what is, it's what you can get out. Yeah.
What's the problem?
I'm a humble tradition.
And also some of the other variables, I mean, what they've done is focus down on
The only thing that's changed that we are aware of, the information that we have,
We're thinking about how you can use a statistic to help you.
as a result of this, all these unknowns,
Well,
this new
a
information,
change in
the numbers
the weather
spike.
data.
So I would say Again, based on the information that we have, it's a positive outcome. We can't assume.
Okay, so you already
Yeah, I've already decided.
You've already built it one way, and
We can't assume other the factors.
So this is mostly.
That's why
No, I pressed it too soon, and I was like, no.
Yeah. So I think I took the perspective of if I spend $1 million on a board, let's use that example. The next time I was thinking about how to spend my next $1 million, I would want to.
All right, so if you're ready, please vote again. The poll is open. You can change your vote if you want.
Oh, interesting.
Herbert seems to be confused.
I was outvoted.
Herbert went from, you what?
I was outvoting wrong.
No, but you vote.
I'm going to stick to my job.
You vote. You
That's
should
my
vote
story, I'm
your.
sticking to it.
Yeah, all right, you're sticking to it. Okay.
Who wants to vote now?
Okay, yeah, so everyone please vote. I don't know, yeah, so please, one more of you who hasn't voted, vote. Why don't you all vote again? Only the last vote counts, so why don't you all vote again?
Oh, you want everyone to vote again?
No.
Just me.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, all right. So who wants to define their answer? Or no, let me put it this way. Can I get anyone who changed their answer from the first vote to the second vote to reflect on why? And I have numbers to prove that. Yeah.
So just for the question I asked, I thought, actually, must be a trick question.
Yeah.
Just be a power room, so I thought.
So what had you answered initially?
Positive.
Okay.
But I thought, well, in fact, there must be more variables here.
Yeah.
You are going to spring on us.
Yeah. So what happened? So let's explain in this variable thing. I promise you there would be no math here. So just in plain English for Jamie, like why you changed from positive to not enough information?
Yeah, there could have been other things going on. They could have changed this nutrition program for the students. They
Right.
could have brought in teachers from Teach from America. They could have fired the Teach from America teachers. We don't know what's going on.
Right. Lots of things are happening. I like so you were a student here several years ago, and the professor tried to trick you all the time?
No, that came later. We had a very simple-minded professor.
Oh, okay. All right. So I didn't try to trick you, but this is a question is fundamental to everything we do in program evaluation and impact evaluation, which is the fact that outcomes improved, even if they improve at a steeper rate, does not mean that Jamie's program was successful, because other things would have happened at that same time. And Jeffrey told those 3 examples. I'm sure Jamie could come with 10 more of things that could have happened at this period of time. And so I want to tell you a little bit about how people who do impact evaluations formalize this notion. And notion here is the following. You have this program just as we saw here. And then what you need to think about is what would have happened in the absence of Jamie's program. And that, in this case, let's say what would have happened is this line here. Suppose that that's what would have happened. That is called a counterfactual. Is what would have happened in the absence of our program. And what an impact is in an impact evaluation is the difference between the outcome we observe and the outcome we would have observed in the absence of the intervention. So before, the question was telling us, is the impact this minus this point? And the answer is not necessarily. It depends on what would have happened. So it's possible that the graduation rates would have continued to go up, but not at such fast rate, in which case Jamie's program would have been a positive impact. Now, it is also possible, so the impact is the difference between those 2 points. It is also possible that Jamie's program came, and because of what Jeffrey said, maybe, is there such thing as Teach for Canada? I don't know if there is. No? Some Kennedy School student, I'm sure, is about to set it up. So, so it is possible that in the absence of the program, things could have improved even more, in which case the impact of Jamie's program would have been negative. And conversely, suppose you had this program where this is what was happening with, say, graduation rates or any other thing, and suppose things went south. So you might be tempted to conclude, well, the program was unsuccessful, but it is possible, at least, that in the absence of the program, things could have decreased even more. And so this would be a program with a positive impact. So the whole idea of impact evaluations is to compare this green dot here with this yellow dot here, which is to compare the outcomes we observe after the program with the outcomes we would have observed in the absence of the program. Does that make sense? Okay. So the problem is the counterfactual, we can't observe it. Can you raise your hand if you saw this movie? All the Hollywood buffs that are around here. Can you raise your hand if you saw this movie?
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Old people saw that.
All the old people saw that movie? Yeah. I was told it was an American classic that even young people watch with their families. Okay. So, Amy, I'm going to do a cold call on you. Can you tell us about this movie? Do you remember or how this movie might be related to the counterfactual? Can you tell us the plot of the story?
So the plot is that the woman that we see before us, we're looking at her life up to a certain point, and then the movie divides into 2 parts. And in one part, she misses a train, and in the other part, she makes the train. And then you're watching sort of like a parallel life for her as she goes through each scenario.
Exactly. And thank you, Amy. And the problem is that, except in movies, we really can't observe the counterfactual. So in It's a Wonderful Life, we can't observe what would have happened if George Bailey wouldn't have been born.
But in fact, that's dramatized in the film.
It is. And so, what an impact evaluation tries to do with this problem is we try to mimic or construct that yellow line artificially. And we do that, and so if you're going to get one concept from the impact evaluation is this counterfactual, and what you really want is to compare this child who went to this tutoring program to what that same child would have experienced if he hadn't gone to the tutoring program. And so what we try to do in an impact evaluation is assess impact by mimicking this counterfactual. The way we do that is we construct a counterfactual by selecting a group of individuals who did not participate in the program. And then what we do, that group is usually called the comparison or the control group. And what we do, how we select that group, is a key decision in an impact evaluation. That's what an impact evaluation is about, is how can we choose this comparison group. And just to wrap up, the idea of this group is you want to select this group that's exactly the same as the group of people who received the program. So let's take, in the case again of the 3rd Street Foundation program, you want to be able to choose a group of children who are not served by the 3rd Street Foundation program, but that look identical to them in everything except one thing, that they are not being served. So this is like comparing apples and apples. And the importance of this is that you want to compare apples and apples because if this were, say, oranges, then you don't know if the difference between those 2 groups is due to the program or to something else, like Jeffrey was saying. All right, so I think I'm going to skip this because we started a little bit late and I want to leave enough time for the main thing. So in conclusion, if you think about 2 things that I'm hoping you got out of this conversation. The first is impact evaluations. They seek to answer the question, what is the causal effect of the program? And the second thing is the way they do this, how we do this is we construct this counterfactual artificially, that what would have happened by choosing a comparison group and comparing apples and apples. I promised Allison that I wouldn't go past this time, so now we can start the debrief. So I hope this was useful, and let's get started.
Thank you. All right, let me grab the remote finally.
Here's the remote.
Okay, so take out your cards. I hope perhaps you've been writing ideas down already, but take a couple minutes now and think about an aspect of Dan's teaching that as a learner you found especially helpful or effective or engaging, and also write a question, something you're curious to ask Dan about what happened here today and how he went about planning this session. Looks like people have had a chance to get a few thoughts down. We'll return to these in a moment. I want to first, though, give Dan the chance to reflect a little bit about what happened, what do you think went well, things you might do differently next time. Just kind of open and pull back the curtain on your own thinking right now.
Yeah. So the first thing you should know is that we got a list of who was coming into this room. And I studied the list and tried to find, just based on your names, who might have had a connection to the topic of impact evaluations. And I found two people who I thought had a pretty tight connection to this world. And I had examples in my mind to connect with those two people. These two people did not show up.
The best laid plans of mice and men.
But your perceptions were very accurate. Just there was a negative correlation.
Exactly. So that I have to say I had to adjust a little bit. The second thing is we were doing things with these clicker devices, which are useful for several purposes, which we can discuss in a while. But if I knew that only 13 of you would show up and 3 more or less planted, like Caroline and Maria, who I said, please come here, I would have devised a bit of a different form of pedagogy that did not necessarily require the use of these clicker devices. Because these devices are very good at aggregating the views of many people. With 10 or 12 people in a classroom, it's not clear to me that that would have been optimal. I think there are some advantages of having used them, but not necessarily. I don't know, if I knew that only 12 of you had come, I don't think I would have designed the class plan. So those are on the sides of things that took me a bit by surprise. On the sides of things that I thought worked well is even though I didn't know your connections to the topic, you gave me great things to work with, and I was able to use that and embed it in the talk in a way that seemed naturally. It could have been that, you know, all of you were like, what programs, I don't care who, and that would have not worked very well as a session. We started a little bit late, so I had a little bit, the clicker question that you saw was a question that perhaps did not generate as much discussion as I would have liked, because most of you already knew correlation is not causation. I heard Erica said during the break, even though she couldn't convince Jason about it.
I changed my vote.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't know if that was solidarity or real conviction. We had there was a more difficult question at the end that I skipped in the interest of having this debrief, but those are some reflections on.
Right. Let's open it up to you all. First, in the kind of first category of the perspectives that you occupied as learners, what did Dan do that was helpful to you as a learner or engaging to you? Concrete things? Amy?
So he kept changing the way that we were learning, I think. There was times when he was lecturing and then we were interacting with technology, and then we were in a group talking. So depending upon how we all learn best, I think he was trying to get to each of us and keep the engagement going. And so I thought that was very helpful.
Right. A lot of different modalities. Yeah. Other reflections on what you saw happening that worked? Jeffrey?
So I speak in my capacity as a victim of teaching at Harvard. I was here in college in the 60s, and then I came back in the 70s for a PhD. And this is dramatically different. I want to tell you how it's dramatically different, which is that you forced us to think through the subject of instruction in real time. And it produces a different kind of result in the mind, and this is well known by people who study these things, but you epitomize it very well. When I was here in the 60s, I would go to Lowell Lecture Hall, and I would listen to Rogers Holobrick talk about Plato, and I would write down as fast as I could, not knowing what, and I think, okay, I can act this way, I'll read stuff here. And of course, you forget stuff, you can't write fast enough, you don't understand the allusions that he's making. And so the things that you did, okay, so what did you do? You forced us to use the clicker, so we had to make a decision, so we had to think through something with the clicker. Then you said, I want you to talk to your fellow students. Okay, so we then must justify our reasoning to other people. And so these are the kinds of things which, it's a completely different process from what it was half a century. So this is one, I should just say, I was a fellow here, I led a lot of courses this past year, and I was struck by how different it was. That's why I wanted to attend this here today, to see what the thinking was that brought to that. I mean, not that Rogers Holobrick was a brilliant person in his field, but he just droned on.
Right, well, it's teaching our dog to whistle. Don't know if he learned it. Dan, can you say a word or two about how the clickers have helped you in the kinds of things that Jeffrey's talking about around student learning and teaching your dog to whistle, but not knowing?
Sure. I think, well, first of all, thank you. I think you already pretty well articulated some of the reasons I use the clickers. One of them is to force you to make a decision and be active in the process of learning. I mean, I realize there were some people in the room for whom this question might have been a very easy question to answer. But even for those people, my hope is that when you then discussed in groups, even the people for whom the question was easy had some learning to do by trying to convince other people in the group about their arguments. So I think one of the things that's become very clear to me in my years of teaching is the more expert I become in the discipline that I teach, the less qualified I am in helping someone who's just beginning to learn. And so the power here is that, I mean, in this case, probably not the case, but in a lot of cases, you're all learning for the first time the subject. And so you are much better able to see what misconceptions people that are at your level of learning might have had. And the interesting thing is that the 3 different tables had I mean, I just listened very, very quickly, but had different ways of explaining the misconceptions. So Erica probably took a course here with, I don't know, some professor here who said correlation is not causation, and that came sort of through there. Jeffrey, you were saying there's another variable, and so each of you made sense of the answer to this question in a way that if I stood here and said, here's the answer, might not have reached you in the same way. I have well, I don't know if you want to come back to clickers, but I have the aha moment for me for the clickers. I could show it, but you should decide how we spend our time.
Let's maybe come back to that in a second after we heard a few questions. What are some questions that people wrote down in response to the second prompt? Yeah, Erica, what's...
So one of the things that I recall, let me start again. I'd be interested in my recollection as a student was that I never came to class without having done the homework, which is weird because that certainly wasn't how I practiced it as an undergraduate, but here I did my homework.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the overall perspective? Because the challenge I see in the classes that I teach is that so often the students come and they haven't done the homework.
Yep.
And so I'm interested in how it was kind of inherent that I never would have come without doing my homework, whereas my undergraduate, I have to say, slightly less, organised and committed about it.
Yeah.
So what do we do here that instills that in people that you just wouldn't show without having done it?
Yeah.
Let's hear a few, kind of harvest several questions and then...
But please write them down.
I am, indeed. Other questions? Amy?
I want to know how long it takes you to prepare for that 20-minute segment if you were teaching it the first time, and then if you're going to teach it a second or a third, how does that tail shrink?
Other questions?
I'm interested in the sort of the timing of this, because the end of this thing was really fast.
Yeah.
And if you look at what was the meat of this, that was all at the end.
Yeah.
So right now, if you pretty much spend 17 minutes doing general interaction and 3 minutes of the meat with lots of bullets, nobody can internalize the meat.
Yeah.
Was that done by design, that it just, or was accident, and otherwise, how would you do it differently?
Yeah.
Okay. So that not only the timing of prep, but the timing during and time management in the actual moment.
Yeah.
Christian?
I'm interested to talk a little more about, there are many, first of all, there are different courses or different contents of teaching. This one was more of a technical version.
Yeah.
There was some technical concepts that you can learn or not learn. Other courses are very different. So you discuss how do social conditions in countries change or whatever, right? So where the solutions are not yet known. So I would like to discuss how you prepare for that, because this was particularly on one side of that spectrum.
Yeah.
Then I have a second question, which is Harvard is internationally so well known for the case method, especially at the other side of the river. Mm-hmm. I find the cases at HKS terribly bad, usually, whereas cases at HBS are wonderful most of the time. I'm exaggerating a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I would like to know, what is your position on that? Why is that?
Yeah.
Do you mean the cases themselves or the ways that they're taught, or both?
More or less the ways they're taught, but sometimes also I would say 50% also the cases themselves.
Okay.
Although I remember that HBS did have to issue an apology for largely forgetting to write women into their cases in the recent past.
Sorry, for what?
Not including women as the protagonists of their cases.
Okay, so cases, case teaching.
Mm-hmm. Alexander,
as opposed to other forms of
yes.
teaching.
Yeah.
Good. Yes.
Yeah, I'm interested in when you're teaching, so the use of technology and potential overuse of technology.
Yeah.
Sometimes, so in this example, I wondered why you used the clicker for the statistics question.
Yeah.
I thought I didn't think it was a particularly critical question. Yeah. I thought the second one was pretty critical or something we could debate. And I wonder about, mixing up methods of teaching and at what point there are diminishing returns and almost it's sort of trying to engage or entertain children rather than
adults.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. these are great. I'm gonna say this is more than we probably can get to, but we have reserved the last 5 minutes to show you a video that offers a really interesting look at a wide range of different forms of active learning going on at the Kennedy School. So we've got 10 minutes to take these on. So we've got a couple questions about time, preparation and time management in class. We've got the issue of how to are there differences in how you approach teaching different kinds of material where there's a technical solution, material where there's not, and there's then also the question of the quality of curricular materials, cases, and other things, as well as how those are taught, and the sort of questions about technology. When is it in the service of a key learning outcome versus a distraction or an entertainment if it's not as necessary?
Great.
What do you want to do first?
The ones that I remember. So let's so let's do the time first. Mark, it wasn't by design. We basically started 10 minutes late. This I should show because it actually answers Amy's question.
Can we go over 10 minutes? Isn't this the last thing of the day?
If you guys want, we're happy to do, but I don't know if other people have. We could do a clicker vote to see who. Yeah, so just to give you a sense, I mean, I can't claim that I do this for every class, Amy, but this also answers more questions. So this is a document that Allison put together. Well, first of all, what you saw here today, the part about impact evaluations I've taught many times, but the thinking about who you are and how we were going to do this in the space of time that we had and how we were going to conduct the debrief is something we thought a lot about. We did a dry run in this same room where we tested every single thing you're saying today. We had people give us feedback on how it went. We made a few adjustments. Tamara came here today at noon to make sure the technology worked, to make sure the audio worked, to make sure. So probably doesn't describe the typical experience of a class, but there's a lot that goes on to make sure that things go well. But I want to show you, this is Allison's work, so you can't see it very well, but this is a 2-page document that she wrote about today's session. And here, Mark, you can see, here's how we're going to spend our time. So we already knew that there might be some latecomers, and she had reserved from 4:30 to 4:40 for the overview, knowing that that was more time than needed. But yet, at 4:40, you know, less than half of the people who were supposed to show up had shown up, and so we had to make some adjustments. So that meant that I had less margin to play with than I would normally have had. Now, you might say I should have prepared for this. It's entirely possible that I could have managed more tightly, maybe going to Alexandra's. I could have skipped the statistics question. This was more of a warm-up kind of question, just to make sure that we were all maybe community creating rather than, because I don't know you. If this were a sort of a classroom where we're seeing each other for the 5th time, I wouldn't have done it. But I think this gives you a little bit of a sense of time and how we allocate. I completely agree. You know, the end was too quick.
Well, and so, I mean, I've done a lot of work with startups, pitch competitions and everything else.
Yeah.
And the biggest recommendation that I always have with them is that say what you want to say at the beginning, in the middle, because if you run out of time at the end, you're cut off and nobody knows what you're selling.
Yeah.
So right now, then, it's really sort of, it's changing the order of things to make sure that the meat gets taught when people are sort of ready to listen to the meat.
Sorry, but isn't this the meat?
No, I mean, now this is the debrief, but I mean, if you look at this, I mean, in a minute it said like, okay, there's impact evaluations, but you need the counterfactual. The counterfactual was rushed over, 7 or 8 slides, pretty much done in about 60 seconds.
But I came to learn about teaching. I didn't come to learn about impact evaluation.
Well, yeah, but we went through basically a role play of doing the first piece, and if I was doing a role play of that interactive thing, 60 seconds to cover 7 slides is way too short. You wouldn't have learnt anything there.
No, I agree. I think this is very fair. It's very fair. I mean, one of the difficulties I had was because I had no clue of whether you might be interested in impact evaluations or not, I felt some responsibility to motivate why you should care about it. If you had come here at the Kennedy School for an executive education program on impact evaluations, I wouldn't have done such a large lead. Having said that, I think you're absolutely right. I could have managed more tightly the first part.
You want to say just a word about Amy's question about kind of the time it takes to teach something for the first time versus future iterations? Is there roughly like twice as long? Or
yeah, I don't know that I'm a good reference for that. I spend probably more time than might be optimal. I obsess over things that might not be optimal to obsess. I also...
Your prime examples didn't show up.
What's that?
Your two prime
examples didn't show up. I try to think carefully about the students that I'll have in the classroom and how that might relate to their own background, and that means that even for a subject like statistics, I'm thinking about, all right, how do I do it differently? I try as best as I can to innovate and not do the same thing year after year, so maybe, having them do part of the work before class with either a case or some online video, and that means then class time is spent differently. So yeah, I spend more time than probably optimal in this question.
Something else that I forgot to repeat that Erica asked was just about, speaking of your time in class as well as leading into it, students' time and this assumption or this seeming norm around students coming to class prepared or not. What's your experience of that? Do you tend to assume, yes, students will come to class prepared, and is that a norm of professional schools versus, say, undergraduates, which I think you were wondering?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've just pointed out the importance of social norms, which I think permeate everything in an institution. It's not only whether people come prepared to class, it's whether they show up on time, how they behave, whether they go out in the middle of the class to get a cup of coffee, whether they check email. All of those things are there. I think the only thing I can tell you with respect to that is that it's much harder for an individual instructor to create those norms in a classroom than it is institution-wide. This is an issue that I struggle with. I frankly am delighted you say that at the Kennedy School you feel that people came prepared. I don't assume that. I usually offer pretty important incentives for students to do it. So, in the case of online modules, I want them to watch these modules before class. The modules have a quiz. That quiz, it doesn't matter what grade they get, but it's part of their problem set, so I know where they are, and so I was a student. If I had an instructor that was really paying attention to whether I did the work and another one who wasn't, that guided my thinking. So as an individual instructor, those are things that I use.
Something else, and this maybe could segue us into the first of Christian's questions about teaching different types of material. Something that I know Dan and the other faculty involved in our core MPP core policy analysis course this past fall did was to have students prepare for class, whether it was in response to a case or other material, by posting comments and ideas in a web format, so that for every class, students needed to have read and synthesized and made some kind of statement or reflection. And that's different from saying do an online module, where the answers are more kind of technically focused, but it was still using technology, hopefully and ideally, towards a core learning goal rather than as a kind of distraction.
Yeah. So in that particular case, I think this connects with several of the themes. The technology of having students post response to cases, or even, in the cases of, what should this person do, allowed us to be able to know where students stood before class starts, and so you can prepare a class that better suits where they are. To give you a very concrete example, one of the classes in the policy analysis course was about cost-benefit analysis. We were using an example where basically the issue of valuing human life came. And I knew that this was an issue where students might come with very strong reactions, and so we asked, one of the prompts for the web posting was, what do you think about valuing human lives? And that allowed us, certainly my section allowed me to learn where students were. In fact, there was one student that felt incredibly strongly because there was a family member, close family member, that was compensated a certain amount of money for being in an area that had undergone some radiation from nuclear energy or something like that. And so knowing that before stepping into a classroom allowed me to manage the conversation better. I think that's a use of technology that I sort of find useful, and it also, going back to Erica's point, enforces the social norms. You know, in a 20-minute, 25-minute presentation, probably overuse the clickers more than they should have. I felt pressure to try to both do a unit that was more or less coherent and at the same time expose you to different teaching approaches, and you know, the choice might not have been optimal in terms of that. In case you're curious, we eliminated a clicker question that was at the beginning to create space for a little bit more of the three things that I said at the beginning, which I felt were important for me to say to be able to contextualize what we were doing.
One of the many things that I admire about Dan and his teaching practice is that after pretty much as far as I have observed and understand, every time after you teach, you jot some quick notes or reflections down on what you could do better next time. Yeah. And so it's really a constant iterative process of learning from each instance so as to continually improve. Thus, again, that connection between innovation and evaluation. And that sort of privileging of reflection and reshaping and using that information is I think, really quite powerful.
To connect to Amy's point on preparing class, because I do that, every time that I'm going to teach a class that I taught in the past, I have a full set of notes of everything that didn't go well the first time, so it feels like immoral not to do something differently. Particularly, like today's session, the first thing I will write down is Mark's comment. You know, time was not managed well given the constraints that I had. So if I had to do this again, I would think differently. I would probably eliminate the statistics clicker question. I would probably keep the remarks at the beginning shorter, and I would do things differently. So.
Well, let me use that as a segue into showing the video. I know that Dan and I, and I'll assume my SLATE colleagues as well, are happy to talk further after the session officially ends to get to your question, Herbert. And I know we'd love to talk further about case creation and case teaching. That's something we care a great deal about as well. But in the interest of trying to honor the time boundaries of what these guys advertised, let's watch this, and then we'll welcome your informal...
Just to set a little bit of context, what you saw here, of course, is a small sample of what one instructor is trying to do. I think there are other people who are using similar approaches, but there are many more approaches to teaching and learning that we're trying here at the school. And so what you'll get to see here is a little bit of a broader perspective on what we're trying to do at SLATE and more broadly at the Kennedy School. So I'm going to step out so you can watch.
Our job at the Kennedy School is to prepare a new generation of public leaders to fix a world in trouble.
The problems that we face are more complex, more intricate, more involved, more global. So we have to think about different ways of teaching and learning.
We've known for a long time that people don't learn best when they're being talked to.
You get a lecture and you get a lot of information thrown at you at once, but it's not necessarily inculcated in your daily understanding of how to address a policy problem.
We now realize that there are much more effective ways of teaching and learning. One of the things we're doing is experimenting with the physical layout of the classroom.
When I first walked into the classroom, I think I was a little bit confused. we weren't passive students listening to someone in the front of the class. We were engaging with each other because we were face to face.
There was a real flattening of the hierarchy, where instead of being, as they put it, the sage on the stage, I was kind of an orchestrator of student learning rather than a deliverer of knowledge.
Students are creating the class themselves. They're a part of fueling the material that's coming out of it.
Class time is the scarcest time of all.
So the professor can either spend a lot of time in class just talking to the students, or he can spend more time in class discussing with the students and being more interactive.
We've been experimenting with a flipped classroom where we deliver material outside of class and before class.
What we've done is create online modules.
Letting the students learn about the concept at their own pace.
And when they come to class, they come with that knowledge ready to work on hard problems.
As evidence accumulates about what works, it changes the whole school's conception of good teaching. Somebody experiments with simulations, whether kind of traditional role-playing simulations or more novel game-based simulations, where people have to deal with a state of the world generated by a roll of the dice. And nobody knows what's going to happen.
While we're dealing with simulations or case studies or video conference, we're engaged in real-world problem solving, but we're still in a classroom. We have to send our students out into the world to practice.
When you get on the ground, you really get to see these concepts come alive.
In the world, everything is messy.
It's real people with real problems, needing real solutions.
We've had so many moments where things didn't go as planned. And I think if everything goes as planned, it's because you're not adapting, you're not iterating, you're not taking signals from the place that you're in.
There is no one best way to engage in active learning.
We don't know the right answer yet.
We have so many ideas.
And we need to continue experimenting, evaluating what we're doing so that we can scale up future innovations.
It's really great to come to a place where there are people so concerned with the learning of the students.
The most important way in which we have an impact on the world is by improving what our students can do. Teaching right, is actually the most powerful sort.
It's given me the most confidence that I can succeed at the business of government.
All right.
Thank you so much for being
Allison
here.
and I are happy to stay here for more time if you want. I understand some of you are going to parties and alumni reunions and other things. Yeah, feel free to approach us if you want to discuss more about this. We're obviously very interested. So thank you for coming here today.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have intervention programs with faculty?
With what?
To refurbish faculty who are not, incoming faculty who are not familiar with these techniques, and what is the reaction? What is the outcome?
We, one of the first things we did at SLATE was to organize a new faculty institute, which is led by Allison, and is precisely about that, to get anyone who's coming to the Kennedy School. You know, it's a 2-day program. It's not like here they're going to learn everything, but it establishes a link between us and the incoming faculty on how they could teach more effectively. I don't know if Allison wants to.
Yeah, one of the highlights of the Institute, from what we hear from the participants, and we do, is assess the event and also look at follow-up engagement with SLATE from those who attended, is that on day 2, all of the participants do some practice teaching, where their peers in the Institute serve as students and give feedback, and we also videotape those practice teaching sessions so that faculty have the chance to try something out where the stakes are relatively low, get some feedback, and prepare to teach here. So,
But these are younger faculty.
no, this is at all faculty who will be
And
teaching.
do you encounter resistances? I mean, I have an ulterior motive. My daughter's at Princeton, and she's at least half of her instructors are just terrible.
Well, but that's because it's Princeton.
It's another factor, sure. But and one of them, by the way, sorry, but Anthony Anthony Graffney, he just got a check in the mail one day for $3 million. He got an award, the Balzan Award or something like that. He's such a tremendous teacher. So other people have had this idea. But you know, some of the instructors demean their courses. They're just lecturing. There's no interactivity. It's not made meaningful. When I was here in college, I had 3 great instructors: Henry Kissinger, Stanley Hoffman, and Sam Beer. These are famous lecturers. But Rogers Albritton, I learned a lot from him, but it was an agonizing experience. I'm just wondering, Rogers Albritton, to you, what would you have been able to recycle him?
Well, so a couple of thoughts about that. So
you have already recycled me in this session now.
So we're thinking pretty strategically about innovation, evaluation, and dissemination. And this is one of a slide and some ways of thinking that Carolyn, who's the director of SLATE and assistant academic dean, came up with. Do you want to speak to this in response to what Jeffrey's asking?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting to see the new faculty institute because our faculty they might be straight out of a PhD program, although that's rare. They usually come from other institutions, having taught 1 or 2 years before they come. They might be tenured at another institution and have chosen to come to Harvard at this point in their career. They might be very high-level practitioners, a former mayor, and it's amazing how most of them are very open to learning how to teach and learn. And I think when they're told, together with their offer letter, that you will attend a mandatory 2-day training on teaching and learning, and then they see some of our best faculty demonstrate the way that teaching and learning works at the Kennedy School, I think they feel that there's a fairly high bar. And you will find that the faculty that joined, since we added the new Faculty Institute 4 to 5 years ago, I think are spend a bit more time thinking about teaching and are more apt to integrate active learning. The challenge is the faculty that came into the Kennedy School prior to the school's investment in SLATE, which is only about 5 years old. So I think with the new faculty coming in, they're in a different space. The older faculty, it's a lot harder. So that's where this comes in, where we develop experiments, we try to gather lessons, and then we try to diffuse the lessons that we've learned. I think a lot of our faculty are driven by evidence. So, and they're also, frankly, they're high achievers. They're the best scholars on the planet in the fields that they're in. They weren't trained in teaching. And when they discover that their colleagues are getting very positive student reviews, or their colleagues are getting a lot of attention from the dean or from Harvard University because they're incredible teachers, I think that ups the ante a little bit, and the faculty get motivated to really work on teaching and learning.
Another thing that we do is to have periodic seminars around teaching practice where we try to get a range of faculty, including some pretty senior level faculty, talking about their experience with a particular angle or dimension of teaching. So recently we had Richard Zeckhauser and Rohini Pandey talking about how their research fuels and synchronizes and synergizes with their teaching and vice versa. So, you know, you have faculty of that caliber known for their scholarship also talking about teaching related issues where that's in the kind of, whether we call it contagion or visibility models and examples, that's part of the kind of diffusion aspect of what we're doing.
I mean, I think hopefully these answers give you a sense of the seriousness of the enterprise. There's a lot more work to do. I mean, I think we are very aware that the experience of students here learning at the school could be better. And I mean, that's what this group of people who you see here at SLATE are trying to do every day. It sounds like it was better than in the 1960s, so hopefully that's progress.
John, you had a question.
Oh.
We didn't...
Oh, no problem. I just had a question. I kind of wanted to kind of build up on Christian's question about just kind of what the case initiatives are.
Yes.
And a second thing is, I noticed in the video that there were students on doing like kind of a field
modules. Field. Yeah.
And I know that at HBS that they have, I think it's mandatory.
Yes.
Like for the first year.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if there's similar initiatives like that here at HKS.
Well, Carolyn, I'm going to let you speak to both of those.
So on the
stand up if you want.
The question of the case method, I think we talked about what we do at the New Faculty Institute. We talked about kind of experimentation and assessment and diffusion. We talked about how much time it takes, Dan, to prepare, and all of those things are expensive. I think cases are quite expensive to develop. I think that cases would probably have become the dominant mode of teaching in most higher education institutions if they were less expensive to develop, if they existed, you know, in large quantities to serve the teaching needs that you might have in your subject, and if they were easier to teach with. To develop what the business school has requires a tremendous amount of resources. They have 120 RAs that work on, a good chunk of them work on cases. They have an elite case writing unit of 12 full-time staff. They have a 4-person coaching team that coaches all of the faculty on how to learn by the case method. Students learn exclusively by the case method in the first year, so they will experience 100 to 200 cases in their first year at the business school. And the faculty teach those cases. So I think that the business school is an interesting model. It's not necessarily a replicable model for most institutions. The Kennedy School teaches public policy. We're much more heterogeneous in terms of the fields that we cover and the degrees that our faculty bring in when they come in the door. Most of them have not learned by the case method. In fact, very few of them have learned by the case method, so it's a completely new method to them. So it requires a fairly big investment to kind of get them up the curve. The case program at the Kennedy School was started about 25 years ago, and we have the largest collection of cases on public and nonprofit management issues in the world. The challenge is that our collection is quite dated. And that's a problem that we're actively working on. Our current dean chose to invest heavily in rebuilding the case program and in building SLATE. So we have doubled the number of cases that we produce. We're now producing kind of video and multimedia cases, but those things are expensive. More than half of the clients that we work with, faculty clients where we develop custom cases for their needs, are new to the case method entirely. So we are coaching them from day one on what is a case, how do you teach with a case, how do you make it work. And it's a bit challenging. You have to teach with a single case 3 times before you can even kind of work out the rough edges and feel comfortable with it. So it's a big investment. The Kennedy School is very committed. We've done a lot. We have about 55 new cases that we've produced in the past few years. So we're working on it, but I think the capital campaign will hopefully enable us to do a lot more in that space.
And then the
We'll
field.
get the field projects
Yeah.
in just a second.
Yeah.
Something that I was exposed to was games and simulations and rolling the dice. So where are those games coming from? Because I find that's a really effective way to work with my group.
Yeah, so very quickly, we, like most of the curriculum materials, either the faculty member develops it by themselves or in collaboration with SLATE. In our policy analysis course this fall, we created a simulation of a pandemic where the state of the world was revealed with the dice. We work with a faculty member, Chris Robichaud, on our faculty who loves these kinds of games and simulations, and used it in the classroom, and hopefully, it was certainly well received by students. It's a very different form of pedagogy. It's also important to sort of think about how you really ground the discussion so that it doesn't feel like you're playing dice in the same way that Alexandra was saying. It doesn't feel like you're just playing with technology, but really feel like you're embedded in the situation that you are trying. But that's certainly something we're investing more and more time. I don't know if you want to say about field.
Field courses, yeah. So you heard a little bit about Linda Bilmes' field course with Joe Curtatone in the city of Somerville. That was kind of the beginning of the Kennedy School's involvement with field courses. Well, there are a few that dated prior to that. So we have about, over the years we've had about 8 or 10 courses where students are working on real projects for real clients, and in most instances they actually go into the field. Linda's course is, I think, about 8 years old now. It's been a phenomenally successful course, both in terms of student learning, in terms of the share of students that actually go into public sector, public service, or local government after taking that class, and also in terms of impact on the city. A lot of local governments hire pretty heavily from Linda Bilmes' class. It's a feeder course, and they'll go work in municipal management after that. But beyond Linda's course, and beyond this kind of range of electives that we offer where students can go into the field, there is a little pilot going on right now to test the idea of taking the PAE process, the policy analysis exercise, which is the Kennedy School version of or the MPP version of the thesis, which are usually done individually, and the students usually select the client, and they may or may not travel to the field. We're piloting the idea of modeling that on Linda Vilma's course and courses like it, where the faculty member actually uses their professional connections to identify a client and help frame a series of questions, then recruit a team of students to work on it, with the idea that the client will have more skin in the game because the faculty member is involved. The faculty member will have a better sense of what a student can actually accomplish, or a team of students in a small amount of time. So I think, and we ran 5 of those, and we used some competitive grant funding that we received to pay for the student teams to travel. 3 of them were domestic, 2 of them were international. Sierra Leone and China were the 2 destinations. And we are currently assessing that. We have a doctoral student from the Ed School working with Dick Light, who's an educational assessment expert, to assess how the learning there compares to the individual student-driven PAEs. So our hope is that the capital campaign could eventually enable us to scale that pilot up, and that more students would experience that kind of team-based, faculty-driven field PAE project.
We're so glad that you're curious about so many things. I mean, we'll keep talking as long as you want us to be here, but you don't want to feel free to fill. Christian, yeah.
I wonder about...
If you need to leave or want to leave, feel free. So, yeah.
Talking about cases, what about all the cases that Kennedy School students bring into the classroom?
So we are very open to student involvement in the process of identifying case topics and developing cases, and we even have a few student-written cases.
I didn't mean the written cases. I just
you mean life experience.
Bring your own,
making,
bring your own case, yeah.
Ron Heifetz would say case in point.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
and that's a very valuable resource. In my experience here is that actually very few professors really take advantage of that.
So I think we think of active learning as a continuum, and the case method where we have a written case or a video case is one method, and then where students apply a framework to their own life experience, the case in point method is on the continuum. It's, again, I think it can be a harder way to teach, and I think it fits certain subjects better than it fits other subjects, but there are a number of faculty that are actively kind of working in that sphere, and I think that's a methodology that we'd be really interested in doing some experimentation with and trying to make transparent to other faculty who might be interested in trying it.
Well, and not only is it points on a continuum in the sense of you know, is it a formal case or not, but also how much time you devote in class to it. So, for example, Dan today, even though, you know, we've talked a lot about he only had 20 minutes and he himself, you know, would have done some things differently, he sort of elicited out of us, a few of you at least, maybe not cases in point in the sort of full Heifetz sense, but so the choice to ask a few of you for examples versus to just use his own, you know, very, very small time commitment there, but that's sort of harvesting from student expertise and experience the kinds of backgrounds that students bring. So.
And gradually that becomes fundamental in almost all teaching situations, whether you're with 5-year-olds or with whatever executive education programs.
Right.
And the executive education program here, and the only lecturer that was banned didn't let people speak.
Right.
So I did and forced them to take questions. But I think what's very interesting then is that I think there's this, I mean, when I took on my teacher prize, there's a concept of trust the teacher. I think there's also almost a notion or a rule of just trust the students.
Yeah.
And right now, in order to get into a school like this, you're not an idiot. You can't be an idiot, otherwise you couldn't get it. Well, you might be an idiot, but there will be other reasons. But in any case, you don't have time to go around 30 people to get all of their questions out. But I think already just giving the opportunity to expose is great. To actually manage it down to 3 was also great. And it meant that it felt more like a personal experience that we could develop and make it connected. I think that just, part of me would say, like, why the hell wouldn't you do it like that?
Right.
Because no other way seems to make any sense. But I think there is a demographic push to that right now people are connected. Another thing just on the demographic push is that, I mean, when I did my course here, I was going online to see what people had said about the course before I went onto it. I downloaded the books before I went onto this thing. So right now the use of technology becomes very interesting, that students are much more enabled than they were ever before. And it does seem to be as though teachers are running about 10 years behind the students.
Depends on the teacher, but yeah, I think by and large, I mean, there's some faculty here who I think who are mobilizing some of the social media and other kinds of digital forms of communication in the service of learning through having students, you know, tweet about class, doing kind of back channel approaches, so that as students are experiencing things, then surfacing what their questions. I mean, we did it in a slower way, but we could have, in a larger group, each of you, you know, wrote something on a card, and then we heard out. We could have had you all send a tweet about what your questions are, and then aggregated that. And so, yeah, I mean, those ways, I think, of students taking more ownership for their learning, which we saw highlighted here, the kind of deployment of social technologies to do that, not just to, say, do an online module before class, but for students to aggregate and surface what their questions and experiences are. These are ripe for the picking, and I think we're just I mean, the hire of Maria as our instructional technologist specialist is sort of, we're on the cusp of, I think, really being able to take full advantage of that here at the Kennedy School.
The one thing I would say, though, is that technology can be an incredible enabler of learning, but it can also be a distractor for learning. And one of the challenges we're facing, I certainly struggle with this, is to what extent you want the technology in the classroom to be the same that people have in meetings and their homes and whatever, because the reality is when people have a computer in front of them, they can do many things, some of which are not related to the learning in the classroom. And how to navigate that is something we are struggling with. I mean, these clicker devices are limited in what they can do relative to a tweet or other forms of learning. In fact, I've experimented with a much more sophisticated software solution to this, but they do have costs in terms of student engagement.
But it is inevitable.
Yeah.
It's completely inevitable. So fighting against this thing
yeah.
is and these are 20 years old. And these
yeah.
are, I mean, I did my PhD work around group decision support systems, so
yes.
this is really old technology.
Yeah.
It just takes 15 years to get into the leading schools.
Yeah.
But I do think it's an interesting challenge for you as a group. Are you going to be at the leading edge of teaching, pushing the methods, or are you going to be running 8 years behind the leading edge?
Yeah.
Which might be the best place for the school, I don't know.
You mean technology-wise, or teaching-wise, or
well,
teaching with technology?
Well, in all of these things. And so, for example, I mean, I've also worked, I'm an associate professor at Holt Business School.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at you guys going out, and this is like really innovative, at Holt there's the Action Learning Program where 3,000 students set up into teams, go out and work with 200 companies every single year.
Wow.
And have been doing that for now, I think, 4 years, I mean, and even longer before that at smaller scale. So there are many methods that are known, that are quite successful. And just a case of, I don't know how open your sort of doors are to sort of like sensing what's going on, bringing in other things.
So when you say you're including HPS then, and thinking about the field course, like
well,
as if that was
there's tons of stuff. I mean, if you look at whatever the top 200 schools, I mean, there's lots of different methods that are being experimented all the time. I don't know if you're even aware of most of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, if this is at the leading edge, but a bit just to be sort of...
Yeah. I mean, perfectly
not to
fine.
say that this isn't good.
No, I'm going to challenge you a little bit, because the goal is learning. It's not whether we're at the leading edge with this technology. There are things that happen in a case discussion. Cases were invented 100 years ago. And for a particular learning outcome, if that is the most effective ways of generating learning, that it is. That's what we have to go for. I'm not suggesting we should be against progress and sort of thinking about how we can do it better, but I don't want us to confuse how new the technology is with the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, it's more thinking about, for example, if you were to do a program and you're meant to do a case study from a different country.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go online and immediately have people almost virtually in the same room with you.
Yeah.
It's a different, I mean, it's much more, technology is becoming much more integrated in what we do. This is a separate device, it's strange, it's different, it's all. So this is, if you like, that sort of middle generation of educational technology, which was technology for technology's sake.
Yeah.
I see many more things coming out where it's much more an integrated blending learning style.
Yeah.
Where you are touching different people, different things. And in terms of getting into students' brains, because they're more interacting with it, it means that it's going to actually get embedded much better.
Yeah.
The interesting question behind that, what you ask, is how does online learning relate to traditional styles of learning, and which part of learning can take place online, actually, quite efficiently. I think we haven't reached that border yet. Yeah. And which part of the learning has to take place in a classroom like this. And just, if I may take us as a case in point right now, like half an hour after the official ending of the session, we are having the discussion I expected from the course to have, actually, right? You said, like, talking about strategies, trade-offs, and experiments involved in educating public leaders in the 21st century. Yeah. This is what I think is real teaching and learning, which is a and also you said before, I found quite interesting, you said in your course earlier, like 3 years ago, it took some time until you convinced the professor to take even questions. It's not about asking questions to a professor, but to having a professor encouraging students to have a good discussion among everybody. Yeah. Not only, and also when I reflect on teaching and learning here, it's so often, even with the professors here at HKS that are considered to be the best ones, that you have the student-professor, student-professor, student-professor one-on-one conversation. But the real stuff happens when you really have a discussion among everybody. Yeah. I have had discussions here with 80, 20, like 100, 120 people, where everybody else back home in Germany says, it's not possible to have a real discussion with 120 people. It is. With the very best ones here, it is. And that is world-class education. And sometimes you hit it here. And that is the reason why I think it's really worthwhile to think about teaching and learning. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have so many courses, also here, where I think, just skip the course. Do it in video, put it online, I watch it at home, it's enough. I don't need to be there, really. Yeah. So my question is, how can you inflict this moments where students get the sparkling eyes, because you have a discussion and you see something of you and you and you that you haven't seen before. And the professor really, as somebody who has one stake in it or one position that he or she gets into the discussion, but not this one-on-one, and I always have to assume that the professor knows everything. That is true for some topics, but by far not for all.
Well, I think when I came to Harvard, I learned so much from my fellow students.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I did not come to Harvard to have students teach me. When I paid tuition, or my parents paid tuition, they expected a professor to be knowledgeable and to convey information, and I still expect that. I think a professor should be more than just a facilitator of discussion. I think a professor should lead the classroom. He should facilitate, but he should have some information. I had some professors, not just in Harvard, but in other places, where they were just exceptional. And so there are few and far between. But there are some professors that they could lecture for an hour, and the class would be captivated. There are a few like that, and that's a gift. There are most professors cannot do that, and maybe they don't realize it, but most professors don't have that gift. But those that have it, I want that. And so I think a challenge for the modern day professor is to integrate the new technologies that are coming online every hour, but also have in them not just the technical knowledge, but the experience, the learning, and how to convey that to students. There should be a difference between a professor and just the students, I think. It may not be such a hierarchy that it used to be, but there still a professorship should mean something. And I think that's the challenge, not just to lecture and to bore students, and to engage them, but also recognize that a classroom is not a place. I didn't come here to be entertained. I came here to learn and to be exposed to the best professors, best students, just the total environment. But I don't want to have my professors shortchanged by my student discussion. I think you've got to find that balance for me. Because there's some students, I've been teaching for a couple of years now, and there's some students who just don't respond to the discussion. There's some students who are very shy. There's some who have disabilities. And so they don't get, they may not benefit as much from the discussion aspect and some of the other interactive things as they would just from someone who can lecture, but can teach and lecture in a way that's engaging. Because I think a good lecturer is engaging and captivating. That's been my experience.
Well, I think that this discussion, I think, is representative of the debates and the forces that are at work in the work that we do every day in SLATE. Is what is the role of student expertise and the student experience and voice? What is the role of, as Jack Donahue said, of not being sage on the stage, but nonetheless bringing expertise to orchestrate and facilitate and to teach, to kind of help people understand the discipline in a way that students alone talking to each other wouldn't be able to. And what is the role of technology, whether it's a lot older or kind of cutting edge social media? These are all the sort of ingredients that the faculty here are sort of struggling with and working with to try to blend into their own teaching style in a way that's most effective. And I think the candor and insight that your questions and your comments have surfaced is really helpful to us, and is, I think, a prime example of why the capital campaign's emphasis among its 4 main areas of emphasis on continuing to support pedagogy and to continue to support innovations in this space. That's why we need a capital campaign, because we're not there yet in all these areas.
You should tell us about 3,000 students enrolling in field studies in your university at some point after you finish.
Yeah, I'd love to sort of carry on this. I mean, I need to go pretty much now, but I'd love to carry on this conversation because there's I set out to change the entire world for better, all of it at the same time. I've done bringing down dictatorships. I've done all kinds of crazy, like really crazy stuff. I'm one of these young.
So this is an easy challenge then.
It's not
comparatively,
hard. Right? It's not that hard. It just requires looking at it differently.
Okay.
So in this global teacher prize for me, it's a ridiculous prize. But what happens is that, but these become basically sort of things that can be adjusted. So fortunately, I'm working with them as a consultant to change, sort of morph that price so that it'll actually be useful.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are networks of people that are trying to do things. We're not connecting together well enough.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of these experiments. We just need to be much smarter as a species so we can start to share.
Yeah.
But then I also have a direct interest. So I just published a book very, very recently, and I need to make a course on my book. So I'm now sort of jotting down busily all the notes I can about sort of how can you make the world's best, absolutely brilliant course. Now when I teach, I get people crying in my course. And not because I'm mean to them.
So does bronchitis. I'm not entirely sure whether that's working or not either.
So the goal sort of engage, and then if I look at timing, I mean, you want to get people engrossed in the topic as fast as possible so you can actually teach them the stuff. Because otherwise, if you spend 16 minutes getting them excited, there's no time to talk to them. So just all of these different tactics. And the other thing then is like sort of how fast can we learn as individuals? And I'm quite good at doing this now, but only because my partner, my wife, was just really critical when I started doing this thing. So I ended up with very fast learning loops, so that I would do the thing, get told immediately why it didn't work out, it sucked, she's now better than she used to be at feedback, and then I would fix it, get better, and then I think there's also trying out as an individual different styles. I don't know if you've ever done a TED Talk before, or a TEDx talk. So then you've got 12 minutes.
Yeah.
And if you then go 1 minute over, this means you're grand, and the final conclusion, cut.
Yeah.
So right now then it just forces you to take the content that you had and swish it and redesign it.
Yeah.
So there are just all of these different ways. I mean, I can see ways of dramatically improving the quality of teaching.
Yeah. Yeah.
To both the baseline of the average, the best ones can get even better, or the ones that are bad either move into consulting or...
But the fascinating thing is, and if you go up to the ed school and take class up there, you'll discover that we don't actually know, there's no single answer to what makes a great teacher. So you can't in fact break it down. Like, it is an art rather than a science, and different people will excel in different ways, and different students will learn best in different ways. And so there's all this research looking at, you know, what moves a classroom, and there are a bunch of people who reckon they can know it when they see it, but nobody's yet managed to break it down in any kind of way that says this is what moves the test score results. So it's like, you may have ideas that work for you, you may have ideas that work in your classroom, but you can't actually set, like, that won't work in every classroom and that won't work for every teacher.
Well, and I think just in general it gets into the whole problems of using averages to measure things. I mean, right now, you've got the outlying students that might be really good or really bad, the block in the middle, who do you focus on? I mean, I find a lot of the research work done at establishments like this pretty bad, in the sense that it says, like, on average, if you do this, you will be happier. And then you look at the research paper that said there's a 7% likelihood that some people in this skewed sample size will do it differently for this particular experiment. Well, what happens is that people around the world hear that as the conclusion, and to be fair to the academics that write the things, I mean, their papers are correct, but as soon as it becomes commercialized in some way and it gets out into the press, people ignore the fact that, you know what, it might kind of be true. So there's a lot of things that happen in teaching as well. I mean, right now, some students are just idiots. So therefore, I mean, that might get just some people will go to Harvard, some people won't.
Mark?
Twice, right?
I would say,
and it's even more fun with wine.
well, I would suggest that whoever wants to keep talking, that we maybe break into more informal discussion at this point. We can exchange cards, make a time to meet, but we've kept you, or you've chosen to stay way past the hour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for